Karen was the kind of person who loved to stand out. Whether it was making loud jokes or pulling silly stunts, she always craved attention wherever she went. Her social media feed was packed with photos of her doing outrageous things, posing on statues, wearing ridiculous costumes, or balancing on railings. Her friends often laughed and cheered her on, but sometimes even they would mutter, "Karen, maybe that's not a good idea." This time, Karen was on vacation, visiting a famous royal palace that was known for its strict rules and history. The palace was magnificent, with tall golden gates, sparkling fountains, and rows of towering guards standing completely still. These guards were dressed in sharp uniforms, holding shiny rifles, and looked like statues. They didn't flinch, blink, or even glance at the crowd. Tourists snapped photos, whispered about their discipline, and stayed behind the marked barriers. Karen, however, wasn't impressed. "They're just standing there, like mannequins," she said with a smirk. "Come on, what's the big deal? They're probably just for show." Her friends exchanged nervous glances. "Karen, don't mess with them," one of them warned. "The signs say not to approach the guards. They're serious about it." Karen waved off their concerns, laughing. "Oh, relax. They're not going to do anything. They'd probably get bored standing there all day. I'll give them a little excitement." As the group walked closer to the palace gates, Karen's curiosity grew. The guards were even more intimidating up close. Their rifles gleamed under the sunlight, and their boots were polished to perfection. They stared straight ahead, their faces expressionless. A part of Karen felt a small flicker of doubt. Maybe they really were as disciplined as people said. But then she noticed the crowd. Everyone was so careful, so quiet. To Karen, it felt ridiculous. Wasn't this supposed to be a fun tourist spot? Karen's mischievous side took over. "Guys, take a picture of me near the guard," she said, walking past the warning signs. Her friends whispered for her to stop, but she was already posing with a wide grin, standing closer than anyone else dared. Some tourists gasped, and a few tried to pull out their phones to record what was happening. Karen noticed how the guard didn't move or react. She tilted her head and muttered, maybe they really are just for decoration." Then an idea struck her, a bold, impulsive idea. What if I just touched the rifle? Would they still stand there like a statue? Her friends froze. "Karen, don't you dare," one of them hissed, but it was too late. Karen turned toward the guard and reached out, her hand inching closer to the rifle. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, and the tension in the air became thick. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, just as Karen's fingers brushed against the shiny surface of the rifle, something unexpected occurred. A deep, commanding voice rang out, "Step back immediately." The guard barked. Karen froze, her heart racing. The guard had moved, his steely eyes fixed directly on her. The crowd gasped in unison, and Karen felt the weight of every single gaze fall on her. She had no idea what she had just started. Karen stood frozen, her hand hovering near the guard's rifle, her confidence melting away. The deep, commanding voice from the royal guard still echoed in her ears. "Step back immediately," he had barked. For the first time, Karen felt unsure. Her playful stunt had suddenly turned serious. The crowd around her had fallen silent. All eyes were on Karen, some with disbelief, others with judgment. A few tourists had even started recording on their phones, whispering nervously to each other. Karen could hear snippets of their conversations. What was she thinking? She's in trouble now. But Karen wasn't one to back down easily. She quickly pulled her hand back and raised her palms in mock surrender, trying to act casual. "Relax, it was just a joke," she said, laughing nervously. "I wasn't going to do anything. It's not like I was trying to steal it." The guard didn't react to her attempt at humor. His face remained stern, his stance unwavering. He didn't look like someone who appreciated jokes, especially ones that involved his rifle. His eyes locked onto Karen's, and she felt like he could see right through her playful facade. "Ma'am, You have violated the rules. Step back behind the barrier immediately, the guard said in a sharp, no-nonsense tone. Karen hesitated. Something about his voice sent a chill down her spine, but she hated being told what to do, especially in front of an audience. She turned to her friends, who were frantically gesturing for her to step away. "Come on, Karen, just stop," one of them whispered urgently. "Yeah, you're pushing it too far," another added, looking genuinely scared. But Karen, feeling the pressure of the watching crowd and not wanting to look weak, waved them off. "It's fine. He's just doing his job," she said loudly, as if to reassure herself as much as anyone else. She took a step back, but not far enough to fully obey the guard's orders. "I didn't even do anything," Karen added, raising her voice so the crowd could hear. She wanted to make it seem like the guard was overreacting. Why is everyone making such a big deal out of this? The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. People were whispering about how Karen wasn't taking the situation seriously. A few even shook their heads in disapproval. Karen's confidence faltered again when another guard nearby shifted his position, clearly on alert. The sight of two guards now watching her made her stomach tighten. She suddenly remembered the signs posted all over the palace grounds. "Do not approach the guards. Strict security rules apply." Karen tried to laugh it off. Okay, I get it," she said, backing up another step. But her voice betrayed her unease. She could feel the tension in the air, and for the first time, she began to wonder if she had made a mistake. The guard didn't budge. His eyes remained fixed on her, unflinching. "This is your final warning," he said firmly. "Return behind the barrier and remain there." The seriousness in his voice sent a jolt of fear through Karen. This wasn't a game anymore. The guards weren't there for decoration. They weren't there to entertain tourists or be part of anyone's joke. They were there to protect the palace, and Karen had crossed the line. As she took a slow step back, the weight of the situation finally started to sink in. The guards weren't going to ignore what she had done. The crowd wasn't going to forget it either. Karen could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she wondered what would happen next. Cliffhanger. Karen's uneasy retreat was interrupted by a second guard stepping forward, signaling someone with a radio. The crowd gasped, and Karen froze once again, realizing the situation was far from over. Karen's retreat came to an abrupt halt as she noticed movement out of the corner of her eye. A second royal guard stepped forward, his rifle positioned in a way that sent a clear message. This was no longer a joke. The sight of two guards now focused entirely on her caused the uneasy murmurs in the crowd to grow louder. Karen's heart pounded in her chest. She glanced at her friends, who were wide-eyed and motionless, clearly unsure of what to do. For a brief moment, Karen thought about slipping back into the crowd and pretending none of this had happened. But before she could move, the first guard raised his hand in a sharp gesture. "Stay where you are," he commanded. The tone of his voice was like a cold wind cutting through her confidence. Karen froze, her mind racing. This wasn't part of the playful, light-hearted scene she had imagined. The guards weren't here to smile and pose for pictures. They were here to protect something important, and Karen had crossed a line. A loud beep crackled from the radio attached to the second guard's shoulder. He leaned in to speak into it, his voice low but firm. Karen couldn't hear what he was saying, but the seriousness in his expression made her stomach churn. She realized he was calling for someone higher up, someone who would likely deal with her personally. The crowd around her began to shift. People whispered and pointed, some pulling out their phones to record the unfolding scene. Karen could hear snippets of their conversations. She's in trouble now. What was she thinking, touching the guard's rifle? I hope they don't arrest her. Karen tried to muster a nervous laugh, hoping to diffuse the tension. All right, I get it. I shouldn't have touched the rifle, she said, her voice shaky but loud enough for the crowd to hear. It was just a joke. No harm done, right? The first guard didn't flinch. His expression remained as stern as ever. This is not a place for jokes, ma'am, he said sharply. Your actions are a breach of security protocol. Stay where you are." Karen's palms started to sweat. She opened her mouth to argue but found that no words came out. For once, her usual bravado was failing her. The guard's unwavering discipline and the growing attention from the crowd made her feel small and exposed. As she stood there, a man in a crisp uniform approached from inside the palace gates. His presence commanded respect, and the guards immediately saluted him. Karen guessed he was some sort of commanding officer, and her heart sank further. This wasn't going away anytime soon. The officer stopped a few feet away from Karen, his gaze calm but piercing. "You have violated the rules of this palace," he said evenly. "Approaching and touching a royal guard's rifle is strictly forbidden. Do you understand the seriousness of your actions?" Karen stammered, trying to explain. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. It was just for fun. I didn't think." "That much is clear," the officer interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. "However, the rules are not optional. They are in place for a reason, and your behavior disrupted the security of this area." The crowd grew quieter, hanging on every word. Karen's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, judging her every move. Cliffhanger. The officer stepped back and gestured toward the guards. "Escort her to the security office," he ordered. Karen's breath caught in her throat as the guards moved closer, their rifles still in position. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Karen's heart raced as the two royal guards closed in on her. Their sharp, deliberate movements left no room for misunderstanding. The officer's command to escort her to the security office echoed in her ears, and her mind spiraled into panic. This was no longer just an embarrassing moment. It was turning into something far more serious. "Wait, wait," Karen blurted, her voice rising with desperation. "This is all a misunderstanding. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. It was just a silly joke." But the guards remained unmoved. One of them gestured for her to step forward. His rifle was no longer just part of a uniform. It now felt like a symbol of authority, reminding her of how wrong her actions had been. The crowd stood silently, watching every second unfold like a drama. Some tourists whispered nervously to one another, while others recorded the scene on their phones. Karen could feel their judgment weighing on her. She had become the center of attention, but not in the way she had hoped. One of Karen's friends tried to step in, her voice trembling. "Please, she didn't mean anything by it. She's impulsive, that's all. Can't you just let her go with a warning?" The officer turned his gaze toward her friend, his expression calm but unyielding. "The rules here are very clear," he said firmly. "Any breach of protocol is taken seriously. It's not just about her intent. It's about maintaining order and ensuring security." Karen's friend fell silent, realizing there was nothing more she could say. The guards motioned for Karen to move, and she reluctantly obeyed, her legs feeling like lead. The officer walked ahead of them, leading her toward a small building near the palace gates. It looked official and imposing, with security cameras mounted on every corner. Karen's mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Was she going to be fined? Arrested? She had only wanted a quick laugh, but now she was terrified of what this could mean. Her usual confidence was nowhere to be found. Inside the security office, the atmosphere was tense. The walls were lined with monitors showing live footage of the palace grounds. A desk in the center held neatly organized files, and a computer, manned by another uniformed officer, who gave Karen a stern look as she entered. The officer in charge gestured for her to sit down in a chair facing the desk. Karen hesitated but complied, her hands fidgeting nervously in her lap. "Do you understand why you're here?" the officer asked, his tone steady but firm. Karen nodded slowly. I think so," she murmured. "But I didn't mean any harm. I swear I didn't." The officer studied her for a moment, then sighed. "Whether or not you meant harm, your actions disrupted the security of the palace. You touched the guard's weapon, which is a serious breach of protocol. These rules are not just for show. They are in place to protect everyone, including you. Karen felt a lump form in her throat. She wanted to argue, but deep down, she knew he was right. She had ignored the signs, dismissed the warnings, and now she was facing the consequences. Cliffhanger. The officer leaned back in his chair and picked up the phone on his desk. "We'll need to report this to the higher authorities," he said. Karen's stomach dropped as she realized her ordeal was far from over. Karen sat in the chair, her palms sweaty and her heart pounding. The security office felt colder than it should have, its sterile atmosphere amplifying her growing sense of dread. The officer's calm yet commanding presence made it clear that she wasn't going to talk her way out of this easily. The officer ended his brief phone call and turned back to Karen. "You've caused a disruption to the palace's security, which is taken very seriously here. Depending on the circumstances, this could lead to significant consequences." Karen gulped. Her mind swirled with thoughts of fines, jail time, or worse. She was trying to stay calm, but the tension in the room was suffocating. I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she stammered. "I just thought it would be funny. It was a mistake." The officer raised an eyebrow. "A mistake that could have had far-reaching consequences. The royal guards are here to protect this palace, and when someone interferes with their duties, it's seen as a threat, whether it's intentional or not." Karen's mouth went dry. She thought back to how easily she had dismissed the warning signs and her friends' protests. What had seemed harmless at the time now felt like one of the biggest mistakes of her life. Just then, the door to the office opened, and another official entered. He was older, with a stern face and an air of authority. The first officer rose and gave him a brief salute. "This is the individual who breached the protocol," he said, gesturing toward Karen. The second officer's sharp eyes studied Karen. She felt like she was being examined under a microscope, every detail of her actions and intentions laid bare. "Explain yourself," he said simply, his voice firm but not unkind. Karen took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble," she said, her voice trembling. "I just thought it would be funny to take a picture with the guard. I didn't realize how serious it was. I'm really sorry." The older officer frowned. "You ignored the warning signs, approached the guards, and touched a weapon. This is not a casual matter, young lady. These rules exist for a reason, to ensure safety and order. What if your actions had been misinterpreted as a threat?" Karen's heart sank further. She hadn't thought about it like that before. To her, it had been a harmless joke, but now she saw how reckless it had been. The older officer exchanged a glance with the first. "We could press charges," he said, making Karen's stomach twist. "But it seems this was a case of poor judgment rather than malicious intent. Still, this cannot go without consequences." Karen felt a glimmer of hope. "Please," she said quickly, "I'll do whatever it takes to make up for this. I promise I've learned my lesson. I won't ever do anything like this again." The older officer studied her for a moment before nodding. "Very well. You will not be arrested, but you will be issued a formal warning. This will go on record, and you are banned from the palace grounds for the rest of your stay. Do you understand?" Karen nodded quickly, relief washing over her. "Yes, I understand. Thank you." Cliffhanger. As Karen stood to leave, she noticed the phones in the crowd outside the window still pointed at her. Her moment of humiliation wasn't over. It was likely going viral. As Karen stepped out of the security office, she felt the weight of the day pressing down on her shoulders. The crowd outside had grown larger, their curious eyes locked onto her as she exited. Phones were pointed at her, recording every step she took. Karen felt a wave of embarrassment wash over her, knowing this moment might already be circulating online for the world to see. Her friends rushed toward her, their faces a mix of relief and worry. "Are you okay?" one of them asked softly. Karen nodded, though her throat felt tight. "I'm fine," she said quietly, but the lump in her chest told a different story. Her friends didn't press her, sensing she wasn't in the mood to talk. They formed a protective barrier around her, gently guiding her away from the crowd and the palace gates. As they walked back toward the main square, Karen replayed the officer's words in her head. What if your actions had been misinterpreted as a threat? She had never thought of herself as someone who could cause a serious problem. To her, life was all about having fun, making people laugh, and standing out. But today had shown her how reckless that mindset could be. Her friends finally stopped in a quieter corner of the square. One of them hesitated before speaking. Karen, you know we love you, but that was really dangerous. What were you thinking? Karen sighed, leaning against a stone bench. I wasn't thinking, she admitted. I just wanted to do something fun, something people would remember. I didn't realize how serious it was until it was too late. Her closest friend placed a hand on her shoulder. We get that you like making people laugh, but there's a time and place for everything. Not every situation is meant to be a joke, you know. Karen nodded slowly, guilt twisting in her stomach. She thought about the guards, how disciplined and serious they were, standing still for hours to protect something bigger than themselves. She had seen them as props for her own amusement, not as people with an important job to do. The realization made her cringe. I feel terrible, Karen said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't just embarrass myself. I disrespected them too. They were just doing their job, and I turned it into a game. Her friends didn't say anything, but their silence was understanding. Karen sat for a while, staring at the ground, the weight of her actions sinking in deeper with every passing second. The sound of a notification on her phone broke the silence. Karen pulled it out and groaned. A video of her encounter with the royal guards was already trending online. The comments were pouring in, some people mocking her for her behavior, others criticizing her lack of respect. Karen closed her phone, feeling a fresh wave of humiliation. This is going to follow me forever, isn't it? She said with a weak smile. Her friends exchanged glances. Maybe, one of them said cautiously, but it's also a chance to learn and grow. You can't undo what happened, but you can show people you've changed. Karen thought about that. She couldn't erase the past, but she could own up to her mistakes. For once, instead of chasing attention, she wanted to do the right thing. Cliffhanger. Karen resolved to make a public apology for her actions, but she didn't know if it would be enough to change how the world now saw her. Karen sat on her hotel bed later that evening, staring at her phone. The video of her encounter with the royal guards had gone viral. Thousands of comments were flooding in, many criticizing her behavior, and others sharing their disbelief at what she had done. Karen felt the weight of every word, each one a reminder of her mistake. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't sure how to fix things. Her usual strategy of brushing things off with humor didn't feel right this time. Deep down, she knew she couldn't ignore this. She had embarrassed herself, disrespected the royal guards, and created a scene that wasn't just about her anymore. Her friends were sitting nearby, quietly supportive but giving her space. One of them finally spoke up. Karen, I know this is hard, but maybe it's time to take responsibility. People online, they're angry because they think you don't care. Maybe if you explain what happened and apologize, it'll show them you've learned from this. Karen nodded slowly. Her friend was right. She had to face this head-on. Avoiding it would only make things worse. Taking a deep breath, she opened her phone and started typing. She wanted to keep it simple and honest, without making excuses. Her first draft felt too defensive. She deleted it. Her second attempt seemed insincere. She deleted that too. After a few tries, she finally wrote something that felt real. I want to apologize for my actions at the royal palace today. What I thought was a harmless joke was, in fact, a serious mistake. I disrespected the rules, the guards, and the importance of their role. I've learned a lot from this experience and understand now how my behavior affected others. I'm truly sorry and will make sure nothing like this happens again. Karen stared at the message for a moment before hitting post. Her hands were shaking as she watched the apology go live. The comments started rolling in almost immediately. Some people appreciated her words and encouraged her to learn from the experience, while others weren't as forgiving. "You did the right thing," one friend said, patting her shoulder. "You can't control how everyone reacts, but at least you've taken responsibility." The next morning, Karen received an email from the palace's administration. Her heart raced as she opened it, half expecting more trouble. But to her surprise, the message was polite and professional. They acknowledged her apology and informed her that her warning would remain on record, but that no further action would be taken. Relief washed over her, but it was mixed with a new sense of humility. She had gotten off lightly, and she knew it. This was her chance to truly reflect on what had happened and how she could grow from it. Later that day, Karen's apology began gaining traction online. People started sharing her message, and while not everyone forgave her, many commented on how rare it was to see someone admit their mistakes so openly. It wasn't the kind of attention Karen had wanted, but it was better than the alternative. Cliffhanger. Karen decided to take it one step further. She would create a video explaining the entire experience, not to gain sympathy, but to help others understand why respecting rules and traditions is so important. Karen sat at her desk, the bright light of her laptop illuminating her face. The video camera was ready, and her heart was racing. For years, she had been comfortable posting fun and carefree moments online. But this was different. This time, she wasn't sharing a joke or a highlight of her trip. She was about to share the hardest lesson she had ever learned. Taking a deep breath, Karen pressed record. She looked directly at the camera and began, her voice steady but sincere. "Hi, everyone. I know many of you have seen the video of what happened at the royal palace, and I want to take this opportunity to explain myself and apologize once again. What I did was wrong. I crossed a line, ignored rules, and disrespected the guards who were just doing their job. At the time, I thought it was harmless fun, but now I see how reckless and disrespectful my actions were." Karen paused, gathering her thoughts. She wanted to be honest, but she also wanted to share what she had learned. "I've always been someone who loves to make people laugh, to do things that stand out. But this time, I let that part of me take over without thinking about the consequences. I disrespected not just the guards, but the rules and traditions of a place that means so much to so many people. I've realized now that respecting other cultures and their boundaries is far more important than any joke or moment of attention." She shared how the guards' response had made her realize the seriousness of their role. They're not just standing there for decoration. They're there to protect something important, and I disrupted that. I hope this serves as a lesson not just for me, but for anyone watching. Sometimes rules are there for a reason, and it's up to us to respect them. Karen ended the video with a heartfelt apology. "To the royal guards, to the people who felt disrespected, and to everyone who has seen that video, I am truly sorry. I hope to do better in the future, and I'm grateful for the chance to learn from this mistake." She hit stop and leaned back in her chair, her heart still racing. Posting the video felt vulnerable, but it also felt right. She uploaded it to her social media, and within hours, it started gaining attention. Comments began flooding in. Some were kind. "This took courage. I respect that you're taking responsibility. Apology accepted. Everyone makes mistakes, but not everyone owns up to them." Others were less forgiving. "Too little, too late. You should have thought about this before you acted." Karen read every comment, taking them all to heart. She didn't expect everyone to forgive her, but she felt a sense of peace knowing she had done everything she could to make things right. Over the next few days, the video gained even more traction, and people began sharing their own experiences of learning from mistakes. Karen's story became a talking point about respect, humility, and the importance of thinking before acting. As she walked through the streets a week later, Karen noticed fewer judgmental stares. Some people even approached her, saying they appreciated her honesty. It wasn't the kind of attention she had wanted when the whole ordeal began, but it was a reminder of how owning up to mistakes could change the narrative. In the end, Karen learned more than she ever expected during her trip. It wasn't just about the palace or the guards. It was about respect, responsibility, and growth. The experience had humbled her, but it had also made her stronger. Ending. Karen smiled as she walked back to her hotel, her head held high. She knew she couldn't erase the past, but she could make sure her future reflected the lessons she had learned.